Hello everyone, so let's jump into our lesson. So first, let's see what we have here. So I have an object and I'm moving the object like that. And we can actually notice this object is blurred. And when I move this object around, when I move the clip, you'll actually notice that the blur is actually following the object. Now I didn't have to manually move every frame and blur this out. I used the tracking option in the color pane. So let's jump to the color page. And let's see what we have here. So first, I'll just try to zoom on my face so we can see what's going on here. So if I disable this clip, you actually notice there's some light information that has been removed from that. So first, let's look at the face region. If I disable this by hitting Control D, we can actually see I've brightened up and added some lights around my face. So you can see I'm bringing that back on and off. Again, if I move this around, we can actually see that lighting information is actually sticking to the face. I just improved the quality of the lights. So another section I want you to notice, we've actually talked about this, is to look at one of the eyes. I just played around and added some lighting information here as well. So if I disable that, you can just see how that looks like as well. So let's go over to the hat. I've added some nice little color information on the hat. If I disable that, we can just see that here, and I'm using that to just enhance how the lights look like. I'll disable this eye because I haven't done anything on the other eye, just to make it look, nice. I don't want to have it, over there. So next, if we look at the lamp, there's a blur on the lamp as well. So if I go to the power window, I can just move this blur around, and you can see it's only affecting some of these. Now this blur is static because the lamp is static. So I'm just blurring out sections here. And also on the door beside me, it's the same concept. I just created a polygon and I'm just blurring out that information there. In fact, we can increase the size and you can see it's covering even areas it's not supposed to, but I'll just drag this and make sure it's here. And again, since the door is not moving, this is actually okay. And then we have the object itself. We'll just go back here and have the object, which is this little box. It's actually this box. Just 1 second. It's actually this box that I'm actually using for my microphone. Nothing serious. So in case this is like a license plate of a car and you're trying to track that, that's how you'll do that. And for this object, we're tracking its position. As it's moving, we're actually tracking this. So if I move the clip, we can actually see that we're actually tracking this mask. And if we go over here and click on this highlight to show us the region, this is the region where we're actually applying this mask. And we can see from the waveform on the scopes, it's just affecting that white region. Although it's putting a little bit of my finger, that's just that. So now that we've seen that lesson, let's go ahead and break this down and just show you a simple example. So what I'll do is to go back to our timeline over here. Let's go to our timeline and let's delete this and let's bring in the clip again. So I'll just bring in the entire clip and I'll just cut out a short section of the clip. So where I'm coming in the frame and just moving that, that's the section I just want to use for this tracking exercise here. I'm just moving it. I think this is fine. So I'll just split the clip from here, move a little bit forward, and then split that from there. And I'll delete this section and also this section. So let's see what we have here. We just have a simple clip where we're just tracking this object. That's great. So to apply that, let's go to the color page. So I'm just clicking on the color page and you can see we have a brand new fresh object here. So how do let's start with the very simple one. Let's blur out this lamp. So to blur out the lamp, I'm going to use a circle path here and I'll just drag this along the lamp. And you can actually see it has some sections here. So this one, the outermost edge, is going to help you resize, right? The center is going to help you move this object at the center like so. And then this red one will help you feather out the effect. So I'm actually putting the mask on the object. And if I go over here, we can actually see how it's affecting that. So if I drag this, it's going to start from the center, but it's going to ignore the edges. And if I drag that, it's going to be a hard edge. So it depends on what you want. So I'll go back here and switch this mask back. Again, we can always invert this mask to affect every other thing else, but that's not what we want to do. So now I have this mask here, I'm going to go over to this blur here. Once I click the blur, now remember the mask is still there. I'll just drag this up a bit and we can see it's blurring out the lamp. So here, I'll just right click and I'll give it a node label. I'll just say lamp blur. So I'm just blurring out the lamp and nothing's moving. So let's create a parallel node. So I'll just go here to add node and add a parallel, just like that. And in this parallel node, what I'll do is to mask out the door and just blur out the region around the door. We'll use a different technique this time around. So let's go to the power window and let's select this pen tool here. So if we select the pen tool, this is where we can draw out a shape. So I'll click here. Now I'm not really worried about being accurate. I'll just click all the way down here like that. And I'll just go over here and draw this shape. Again, it's the same thing we're going to do. So we'll go over to the blur window. And here, we'll just blur out this door like so. Excuse me. And what we can also do is to actually affect the color. We can change the color of the door. And let's quickly do that. So here, I'll go to the curves. And not just the color, we can even adjust the darkness or the lightness. So I'm adding these 2 points. And I'm dragging this down just to make the door a bit dark there. And I'm pushing this highlight up a little bit. So next, here still on the curves, I'll go over to the hue versus saturation will be a good one. And I'll pick this color on the door. It's going to create some color points with a handle. And what I can do is just desaturate or increase the saturation of that. So I'll just desaturate that a bit like so. And I'll go back to hue versus hue, and I'll click this point on the hue versus hue, and I'll just push that a little bit just to make the door slightly cool, like that. And I'll right click on the node label, and I'll just call that the door. All right, so we've seen how we can do that for the door. So how do we track, the box? That's straightforward. I'm glad you asked. Let's do that. So here, I'll add another parallel node. So right click on this one, go to add node and add a parallel. And I'll call this the box. So I'll right click and go to node label. And I'll call this the box because we want to work on the box now. So the box selected, let's go to the power window and let's draw out a little shape around this. So one of the nice shapes to draw is I'll use the pen tool and just click here, click around this, nothing too serious like that. And here we have this. So now with the box selected, what we want to do is to track this box. To track that, we need to go over here to the tracker. And once we're on the tracker, we don't really have any rotation for the box going on. I might disable rotation. And what I'll do over here is to track forward and reverse. So basically what it's going to do is to look, using those points we've mapped, it's going to track forward and backwards. So if we indeed drag this, we can see that we're tracking forward and backwards, and it's actually tracking this box. So now that we are tracking the box, what we can now do is to apply some effects. I'll go over here to the blur mask, and I'll just drag this up a little bit just to blur out that information on the box. And when we track, we can actually see it's tracking the entire box. And there are some sections where it's not really doing a good job, especially towards the ending. It's actually not tracking that. So let's see how we can fix that. So to fix the tracking issues, if we go back to the tracker, we need to go to this option called the frame over here. And once we are on the frame, we could just drag this over here like that. Just move this point like so, and then adjust this section like that. So that's how we can make adjustments. Not on the clip, make sure you're on the frame to make adjustments to the tracker. And once we're done, we can go back to the clip and then play our tracking to see how that looks like now. All right, so let's add a little bit of adjustment on the face, right? So if we go back to here, we need to separate this. Now, I could create everything on one node, but it just helps to, create this on different nodes so that you can always make changes when you need to. So let's go ahead and add we can add a serial if we want, or add a parallel. It just helps organizing this. There's no stone, there's nothing written on stone. So I'll use Control S, I think Alt S to add a serial. Sorry, that's Alt S. That's a serial, and I'll right click on this, go to the node label, and let's just add a little bit of light effects on the face. Now, since the face, we can do some simple things to the face. We can specifically, and I think I want to use the high quality on this. This is a very short clip. So, okay, it's actually on high quality, not the proxies. So let's make sure this is on high quality, and we'll go back to our color page. And so for the face, I just wanted to affect this region here where we have the lamp on, increase the saturation and lower the details just a little bit. So to do that, let's go to our tracking window and select the pen tool or the polygon tool, and let's draw a nice little shape just around here like that. And it doesn't mean we can't refine this. We can always refine the shape. For example, here, I might want to push this and make this a little bit curvy so that it doesn't look all mechanical, right? And over here, I think there's no need to even add that point. So we can go here. So we'll just leave it like that. So now that we have a mask around this face, this is what we have. So this region is going to be affected by whatever we do here. So I'll go to the curves over here, and I'll go back to our curves. And what I'll do is to add a few custom points here and then drag this down a bit. So you can actually see it's not really giving us that smooth info. So I'll just drag this down a bit to just increase the brightness around the face alone. And then next I can switch to this one, and I can click this orangey kind of color. So I'm using this to sample the color. We can sample any color actually. So I'm just going to sample this point and then bump that up a bit. You can see, aha, just like that, just a little bit. I can increase the range and drag this and bump this up just a little bit. All right. So now that we've done that, if we move our frame, it's not going to, track that setup we've done there. It's not going to track that. So let's go back here. And what we can now do is and since we're not really moving our face that much, I think this is fine, but just to make sure everything is smooth, we can go to the tracker and then track back and forward. So we can have a little bit of, in case there are places we move, we don't want that to be affected. And basically that's pretty much how I created this. Now to add a final look to this object, I'll just go over, any of these nodes, and I'll just, here I'll do Alt S to add I'll just drag this parallel node, and this is going to be the final look. So this is a simple bonus color grading. And what I'll do is to quickly add a label to this, and I'll just call this look, and it's not going to be anything, complicated. And here I'll go back to our color, and this is going to affect everything. So I'll just drag this over here, and I'll click on these 2 points, just drag the lighting down a bit, and I'll just bump up and reduce this so I can have the focus around me. Again, remember, we can add a large shape to blur everything and then track it. That's also going to be possible if I just want the focus to be on me, for instance, like this. So before this, I'll right click and I'll go to add node and add a serial before. So I'll call this one large blur, like so. And what we'll do is to go over here to the tracker and then add a circle. And this is going to be a large circle. So I'll just zoom out a bit and then drag this like that. And I'll add a nice soft little gradient here. and I'll go to the blur and I'll just increase this blur like so. So you can see it's blurring everything out. And what we can do is we can go back to that shape on the power window. So once we have our large blur, if we want to invert the blur, all we need to do is to go to our power window, and here where we have the mask, we'll click on the other one. This is going to invert the mask basically here. And if we turn this off, we can actually see it's the opposite region. So here, wherever I am, that's where, that focus is going to be. All right, so now that we have that, we can go back to our look, go back to our color curves, and here we can use our color wheels, and I'll switch this back to wheels. And for our lift, I'll just drag this down a bit. I'll push this up a bit, and I'll just create a nice little warm look. And for our gamma, which is for the skin, I'll just dial that down a bit and push that. So just slightly. For our highlights, I'll just drag that up a bit. And then for our offset, I'll just drag this towards a warmer look. So if I go over here and hit Control D, this is our original look. This is our final look. I think I prefer the original look. So I'll just go ahead and cool this off a bit, especially for our shadows. Like so, for our skin tones, I'll just dial that up a bit like that. And let's take a look now. So we have that, and now we have this look. So it depends on your choice. And basically, that's how we can create a power window and use the power window to basically, make changes, to adjust the entire document, to add effects to our entire work. For instance, this blur, we can still go to this blur and do things like, add a nice little shadow region to this like that. So you can see what I'm doing. So regions that's around, we're creating a nice little vignette effect, and we can go back to the window and then add this softness to affect how that's affecting everything. And we can always invert this back to see that vignette in our face, and we can switch this back to see that vignette effect like so. Around with this just to add a nice little look here, and then I'll just desaturate this a bit and dial down the mid details. And then finally, if we go over here and take a look at our work now, this is our final result. We now actually have blurred out some sections, added focus to ourselves, blurred out the object we're trying to track, and basically that's how you can create and work with the power window. And if you want to see a before and after, you can always click on this. This is the before and this is the after. This is the before and this is the after. So thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.